Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here today for the first webinar of the 2025-26 academic year presented by Bayer, Behavioral Economics in Action at Rotman. Although we are meeting remotely today, we wish to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. My name is Tongzhe Hussain, and I'm a professor at the Rotman School of Management and UTM Management at the University of Toronto. And I also serve as the director of Bayer. And today, it's my distinct pleasure to serve as the moderator of today's webinar by Professor Tongzhe Li from University of Guelph. Before I introduce her, I would like to go over the ground rules for this webinar. Throughout the webinar session, please submit your questions by clicking the Q&A tab at the top or bottom of your Zoom screen and typing it into entry box. At the end of the talk, and with time permitting, we will have a question and answer session in where I will select questions from the Q&A tab. So let me introduce our speaker without further ado. Dr. Tongzhe Li is the Arrell Chair in Behavioral and Experimental Economics, professor in the Department of Food, Agricultural, and Resource Economics, FAIR, and is the founding director of the FAIR Laboratory for Experimental and Applied Economics, FAIR Lab. She currently serves as the president of Canadian Experimental and Behavioral Economics Research Group, CBERG. Her current projects focus on innovation, adoption, and consumer behavior in an agri-food environmental context. In addition, she is deeply interested in studying social comparison and discrimination issues. Thank you, Tongzhe, for being the first speaker of our this year's webinar series. The floor is yours. Please take it away.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so first of all, thank you, Tongzhe, for the introduction. Thanks for the organizers. It's my great pleasure to be here. And what I would like to talk about today is self-replications, and potentially we're going to have a lively discussion about null results and whether or not, when we self-replicate, especially when we actually face null results in our experiments, would this be a dilemma, or would this actually serve as new hope for experimental economists? Okay, as Tongzhe introduced, I'm currently professor and Arrell Family Chair in Behavioral and Experimental Economics. What that essentially means is, due to the fact that I belong to an agricultural economics department, a lot of my research projects are quite applied. And although I'm also very interested and I have ongoing projects testing economic theory, so on and so forth, I also have some projects that built on economic theory developed already in the literature and see whether or not there are some ways for us to actually test the treatment effects in general and see whether or not we can inform policy in one way or the other. So well, then again, thank you so much for being here in this room, and let's continue with the outline here. Okay, so this is sort of a non-traditional presentation from my point of view, on my end, anyways. So, I'm actually going to talk about a few things instead of just one paper. So I will build everything upon this paper. Okay, this is co-authored work with Colin Weigel, who is currently working at the California state government in their environmental branch. Paul Arrell, who is a professor at Johns Hopkins University, and Kent Messer, who is a professor at the University of Delaware. So the four of us have this co-authored paper called Underpowered Studies and Exaggerated Effects. And from the title, you can see it's a replication and reevaluation of the magnitude of anchoring effects. So I am going to first talk about that paper and how it was developed, our journey, so on and so forth. And then I am going to talk about my reflection on self-replication, because the uniqueness of this paper that I'm going to talk about is we're not actually just replicating other research when it comes to anchoring effects. However, we actually replicated one of our own applied research projects, and then in this self-replication, we enlarged our sample size, keeping the experimental design, therefore achieving a higher statistical power. And then we found something really interesting. So I would like to share my reflection on self-replication in general. Are we self-replicating enough? And if so, what are the implications? If not, then what can we do as a research field to essentially collaborate with founders and practitioners to see whether or not we can actually keep that moving for the good. And then I'm going to quickly touch on what next. So basically, based on my this project of mine, as well as my reflection and experience, what kind of opportunities and challenges I see going forward in this field. So now let me first talk about this paper, okay? So again, underpowered studies and exaggerated effects, a replication and reevaluation of the magnitude of anchoring effects. I think, probably a lot of people in this audience already know, anchoring effect is actually a widely studied factor. Okay, so we actually identify this as one of the widely studied factors causing behavioral biases as anchoring, which is a form of priming in which exposing people to specific numbers would influence their subsequent estimates of the values, such as their willingness to pay for a good. So for those of you who are interested in like review papers, I put two there. Both are really nice reviews when it comes to anchoring effects and how it influences people's valuation, specifically willingness to pay and willingness to accept. And so in the context of an experimental auction, then an anchor can be an arbitrary number in the decision environment. And after seeing this number, participants tend to bid close to the value of that number. Thus, the number serves as an anchor. So this traces back all the way to Tversky and Kahneman back in 1974. So, and then in the context of consumer behavior, okay, which is a specific stream of literature that I contribute and I closely follow. So in this context, reported effects of anchoring have been surprisingly large. So if we think about Arrell and colleagues' paper back in 2003, published in QJE, then what they found was actually, by having different anchors could more than double their participants' willingness to pay. And if you're not familiar with that paper, so what they essentially did was to recruit students into their lab, and they reminded them the last two digits of their social security number. So this was a study based in the United States. So if you think about the last two digits of one's social security number, it ranges from 01 all the way to 99, okay? So serves as a really completely random number, and their participants, of course, were aware that those are random numbers. And once they were reminded of the last two digits of their social security number, they then went on to bet on calculator, chocolates, so on and so forth. And they've reported that, but just by seeing a higher number randomly shown based on their social security, actually more than doubled participants' willingness to pay. So, and then that paper, of course, got a lot of attention, right? And was replicated quite a bit already. So then in 2010, Bergman et al. Replicated the study, and they saw that, well, instead of doubling the willingness to pay, from their experiment, the willingness to pay actually increased by 75% if you compare the highest number compared to the lowest number by estimate. And well, there are also further replications, and Zhang et al., for example, in 2016, they actually showed that, well, anchoring can increase willingness to pay by as high as 300%. So which number, which magnitude should we have the most confidence on? Is something the literature has been debating about. But at the same time, we actually approach this from an angle of statistical power and see how that goes. Okay. But no matter where people come from, right? If this is replication crisis, or actually are those really large numbers credible? Well, the research question at the center is, can this costless behavioral instrument consistently result in large economic impacts at large scale? So if we think about, nudging people towards a higher willingness to pay is one thing, but there's also another famous example, which is, the default value and how the default options can actually change people's contribution to 401k, which is the major retirement account in the United States. And what people found was, default values, for example, default option as an anchor actually could change people's behavior in a very dramatic way and will have large economic impacts at large scale. Another example would be, organ donation, right? And well, so basically, there are numerous studies that have shown, in different regions, when the opt-in option is different, well, people actually get anchored into that default value when it comes to, when you go get your driver's license, people ask you, if you were involved in a fatal accident, would you be willing to donate your organ? And as you can imagine, that would also be really, really important, nudge and anchoring that will have large economic impacts. Well, but at the same time, if we step down from those dichotomous and binary nudges, anchoring and default options, if we think about the literature that nudges consumers towards a higher willingness to pay, okay? And of course, I mean, those are valuable insights to gain, because a lot of the times, especially if you think about consumption products that have positive, let's say, externality, right? So for example, if a product is much more environmentally friendly compared to their counterparts, then nudging the average consumer towards a higher willingness to pay or a preference towards that product compared to their less environmentally friendly counterpart would be a meaningful act to actually adopt from a policymaker's point of view, from practitioner point of view, and those are really interesting topics to researchers. But at the same time, those are actually more debatable compared to a dichotomous and binary default option type of anchor. So some authors have questioned the accuracy of the large effect sizes published in the anchoring literature. Okay, and this traces back to Gutenberg 2012 and by Menendez in 2014, so on and so forth. And also, well, my co-authors and I had a paper utilizing a lab in the field experiment. And in that previous paper, we also questioned the accuracy of the large effects ourselves. And I'm going to dig into that paper a little bit later. Well, then in this literature, researchers also have identified different factors that could potentially explain why we found relatively large effect sizes. So the most important three or the most well-known three factors would be publication bias, researchers' degrees of freedom, and underpowered empirical designs. So then, perhaps the most important one in practice is actually publication bias. So publication bias would represent preferences of journal editors and referees to publish studies that show large statistically significant effects. So, well, if you think about this from a journal editor or referee's point of view, especially in the old days, of course it makes sense, right? Because those large, unexpected and statistically significant effects are actually going to draw more attention and they are perceived as more novel. So this phenomenon, which is called publication bias, has been widely reported. Okay, now you can see you can see discussion on social sciences in general. You can also see discussion on the empirical economics in general, including observational studies and experimental studies. And you can also find a really recent paper talking about publication bias, specifically for behavioral economics. It was published in 2022 by Ferrero and Tracy. So this widely reported publication bias can really exacerbate the influence of the other two factors, which is, researchers' degree of freedom and underpowered empirical designs. So now, well, of course, I'm an experimental and behavioral economist, and those reviews are really exciting. And well, what got me really thinking is then, can we do something? Can we run some experiments and see whether or not we can actually test this empirical findings with our firsthand data? So there comes our experiment, and I call it experiment dash original. Okay, so it all started like this. There were multiple founders who were really interested in the adoption of residential water runoff management practices. So, well, we were actually approached as a research team because, so a little bit background, there's an research entity called CBER. So basically it's Center for Behavior and Experimental Economics for Agri-Environmental Research. And so this organization, which I'm affiliated with, down in the United States, got approached by multiple founders, and a lot of them were saying, we are focusing a lot in terms of water runoff from agricultural lands. But at the same time, if you think about a sunny, great summer day, residential lawns and homeowners are also going to apply fertilizer. They're also going to, apply water on their lawns and their gardens, and those can potentially cause a lot of water runoff problems as well. And those founders are really interested in, if we have technologies that can mitigate that problem, can we get residents in certain regions to be interested in those products and practices? So therefore, we thought about, well, yeah, sure, this is a meaningful research question, but a really applied one. So when we address those type of important and applied questions, we want to dig into the literature, and one of the most well-known identified factor would be the anchoring effect. So we thought, okay, what about we run an experimental auction and find out whether or not the anchoring of a product's price will change our participants' willingness to pay in this case. So we designed an experiment. So like a lot of those papers we cited in the literature, okay, this experiment, and we call it home bias, which is the home, stewardship towards the environment, so on and so forth. So that original study used BDM, so again, used by Arrell, Bergman, and so on and so forth, okay? So we kept that incentivization and experiment auction mechanism consistent. And the anchor in this original experiment was the default starting position of a slider, which was chosen randomly for each subject from a uniform distribution. So again, similar to the distributions of Social Security number digits used in other studies. And we enlarged the sample size to include, more than 300 participants in this original study. So our participants were a wide range of adults who lived in the watershed impaired by nutrient pollution, which enhances the experiment's external validity. So instead of recruiting students to our lab, we actually combined ways to recruit local residents to our lab, which is a framed lab field experiment. We also took our mobile lab out in the field to different locations as a lab in the field experiment. But either way, we were doing that, trying to enhance the experiment's external validity. So just to motivate this context a little bit more, as you can see from the time in Chesapeake Bay, which was the location, the watershed where our original experiment was conducted in. So you can see that nutrient pollution is a severe problem to the watershed in that region. So this was from US EPA back in 2017-ish. Okay, as you can see, after heavy rainfall, there are a lot of nutrients floating to the watershed, causing a lot of environmental problems. Therefore, we are investigating a very well-established behavioral factor, but in a very unique and important context. So here's the visualization of an example of interface. So one of those products we auctioned off through our BDM was this soaker hose system that you can see. And we were actually carrying all of those products out in the field, so on and so forth. And we introduced this product. For example, a soaker hose will keep plants well watered while minimizing runoff. It ensures the water goes right to the plant and slowly filters into the ground, so on and so forth. Okay, and we describe this hose is 50 feet long and is made by this brand. So, and you can see the slider ranging from 0 to 15, which was the range of the bidding pages in this case. And a participant can slide this slider anywhere or click minus plus to define adjustment. And then once they place their bid, they click continue to go to the next page. And so the anchoring would be the starting point on this slider, and this is an example where we're showing the highest anchor, and there are cases where people are seeing lower ranker. So this is essentially what happens. Well, we recruited people to our lab. We also went out to different locations to get adult participants. And a nice feature of this original study was also we were able to actually follow up. So basically, among the people who actually purchased our products, we actually, with their consent, we actually went to their homes to do a little bit nice audit to see whether or not they're actually using the product. But that's a different research topic. So for today, I am going to focus on the default setting, the anchoring of this design. Okay. So well, now to just give away the main findings on that front. Okay. What we concluded was anchoring increased adult consumers' valuation for water runoff management products by 31%. Which translates to approximately 0.3 standard deviations. Okay, so well, actually, 0.3 standard deviations when it comes to an effect size is, according to Cohen's D, actually that's the normal, effect size that you should be utilizing when you conduct statistical power analysis if you have non-informative prior anyways, right? So, but in this case, we were able to actually find the statistics, okay? So, and then that paper was published in 2021, okay? And we titled it as a field experiment to estimate the effects of anchoring and framing on residents' willingness to purchase water runoff management technologies. And it was published in Resource and Energy Economics. So, Now, we were looking into that paper published back in 2021. And after we collected the data, one of my co-authors, Paul Arrell from Johns Hopkins Universities, he was very interested in seeing. So basically, the thought process went like this, right? We were examining a really context-rich question. And when we enlarged our sample size beyond what was typically included in the literature back then, we were able to find some kind of effect, statistically significant effects, but the effect size was smaller. So he got really interested and motivated us to actually take a look at if we even enlarge our sample size further and achieve a really high statistical power, would our effect size keep on going down? And since we already were able to publish a paper and get some good feedbacks from fellow researchers by replicating other people's work when it comes to anchoring, maybe we can do this and replicate our own study because we already know all the setup, so on and so forth. Okay, so what happened then is you can see that from this slide. This is actually a self-replication by 3 of the original authors, plus one more person who was very interested in statistical power analysis, so on and so forth. So then we kept exactly the same design. So water runoff management products, BDM, representative residence, anchoring with default starting position. And we had a strong focus on statistical power. So basically, it's the likelihood of detecting a true effect, which is the complement of a type 2 error. And with that focus, we were able to also get the effect size and the standard deviations and so forth based on the original experiment. So you could imagine, when a paper gets published in an academic journal, you don't always find all the details of how the authors actually conducted the experiment. What are their true effect size, especially the non-parametric way of testing, and their standard deviation, so on and so forth. It's really difficult to dig all of those details up. But at the same time, because we're doing a self-replication, we were able to actually be on the nose on all of this. And we further enlarged our sample size from 336 to 621. So now I just wanted to show our calculated statistical power. Okay. So if we think about Arrell et al. Paper, which was one of the very first when it comes to anchoring effect, specifically using BDM on consumer willingness to pay. Okay, their sample size was 55, and the calculated power, ex post calculated power based on their effect size and standard deviation was 19%. So that would actually mean that you would have a type 2 error of 81%. Okay, so it was to our surprise that they were able to find such a large effect size based on this power. And then, the Bergman et al. Paper then enlarged the sample size and and they increased their statistical power to 31%. Okay. And this is not a criticism in terms of slightly lower sample sizes in the previous studies, because I mean those were the common sense back then. Okay, it is only until recent years when people started to actually learn from our own experience and mistakes to try to enlarge statistical power analysis. So this is not a criticism; it's rather a statement of fact in terms of when previous research found really large effect size, what was their statistical power at the time of the design. So the original paper by me and co-authors, the sample size was about 300, and the calculated statistical power was 41%. And then, based on the effect size and standard deviation from that original study, then we wanted to achieve a statistical power of 95%. So our calculation actually told us we need slightly more than 600 people to achieve that. So basically, we achieved a sample size of 621, and the final statistical power was 96%. Okay, so and then this is a visualization. So basically, if we standardize the true treatment effect by standard deviation, then with the two different studies sample sizes, this would be our statistical power. So on the y-axis, it depicts our statistical power, and on the x-axis, it's the standardized effect size. So as you can see, by enlarging our sample size, our replication actually enlarged our statistical power by quite a bit. Okay. So now the next few slides, I'll go through them relatively quickly. Well, the reason why they're here is because they were actually in the publication of our original study. So as you can see, the default start bit is the main variable of interest, and we run GLS and TOBIT, okay, and show they're marginally statistically significant. And then we then further reported a linear hurdle model. And what we concluded was we calculated the marginal effect. And what we found was when we utilized a hurdle model, then the effect size became more statistically significant. And of course, either of those models would give you a positive effect, treatment effect, which is very consistent with the literature. And then we in that paper, I couldn't help but referring to refer to this hurdle model more than the other two because it's more exciting, right? What we found was by giving people higher value, actually significantly change the likelihood of people bidding a positive amount, but it did increase the bid amount once people overcame that hurdle. So we actually built upon this hurdle model for our main story. Okay. So, and then this was also put in the abstract of our original study. And what we talked about was the estimated effect on average willingness to pay from the anchor depends on how bids of 0 are modeled. But the results imply that higher anchors led to higher willingness to pay. So again, we were trying to build the story around that hurdle model, and we were very transparent in terms of the estimated effect does depend on how 0 bids were modeled. So what about the replication? So this was also put into the paper as the main table. And as you can see, we also run linear OLS, and we run hurdle, okay? And we also handled 0 bids in different ways. So the takeaway message from this table is we were not finding statistically significant results in this replication study, despite the fact that we actually achieved a higher power. So it is a very interesting finding, and this is our conclusion, right? In the replication, we increased the original design's statistical power from, I think it's typo there, so it should be 41% to 96%. Anyways, our replication results reject the size of the original estimated effect, and we find an estimated effect of 3.4% instead of 31%. So basically, when you change your default setting, which is your anchor, from the lowest value, which is 0, to the highest value, which was 15, okay? So the effect size on participants' bid in this replication was 3.4% instead of 31% in the original study. So just as a reminder, this 31% in the original study was already lower than a lot of papers, a lot of findings in the literature. Okay, so well, let me then use the next probably 5 minutes to talk about my reflection on this self-replication in general. So this was to me a really fun but challenging journey. So, well, it took us 9 years between data collection and publication. So, luckily, the paper was just published not too long ago. That's why I'm presenting this paper now. So this paper was finally published in Economic Inquiry. And so it took us actually more than 9 years between data collection and publication for this replication, okay? Because we kept getting rejections, and it was really difficult to actually persuade people this is an important paper, because it is a replication on a really hot topic that people think they all know what is going on. So, and even among the research team, of course, we interpret the results from different perspectives, right? Some of us were very quickly in accepting when you enlarge the sample size and achieve a higher power, this was expected. Some of us were, trying to understand whether or not there's some detail that we overlooked that can potentially explain why there's disparity between this study and the rest of the literature that's really well established. So of course, all co-authors love each other and we support each other. But at the same time, the interpretation of this null results can always be challenging, because it's not the black and white story you can tell, right? And we also experience learning by doing in a rapidly changing research environment. So back then, although you're actually looking at a group of co-authors who are really, really early on when recognizing, pre-analysis plan, pre-registration, statistical power analysis. But even for us, we find that there is a rapidly changing research environment when it comes to pre-registration and statistical power analysis, because I think started from from my experiences, like this 2 years, a lot of referees are looking into pre-registration, and people have different standards, right? So like even for us, as a fully admitted disclosure, we actually didn't even pre-register our replication study, because we thought it was like really straightforward and we were doing a replication. Why would we have to pre-register it? So, but it turned out, if I had a chance to do it again, of course, I would pre-register and make everything more transparent. But at the same time, this is why I'm saying this is admittedly a very transparent disclaim, because even for us who are really advocating for replication and pre-registration, so on and so forth, we forgot or we just didn't think it was necessary to pre-register our replication, which is kind of sarcastic in a way. So, and also on a different project, I got an anonymous reviewers referee report from Nature this year, and that reviewer had one sentence there that really got me thinking. So, quoting them, in the past, economists often used replication as a way to damage their opponent's position. In other words, to play gotcha. And of course, the referee was saying good things about our paper, and by saying, we are not playing gotcha in this case. But at the same time, it really got me thinking. And well, so now, well, if people are doing replications to play gotcha, I think that's of course I disagree with that ideology. But at the same time, when it comes to replication, they exist for a lot of good reasons, right? There are so many important research questions needing context-specific investigation. You can think about nudges in general. One nudge that worked in one context doesn't necessarily translate into a working nudge in another. Information intervention is another really broad factor, but it's very important. It's not just about how people respond to information in their behavioral, in this case, bidding. It's also about people's belief updating. It's also about how people perceive uncertainty and risks when there is information intervention. This is a really important topic, but at the same time, I think it deserves much more replication in different contexts. treatment effects over time across different cultures would be really important as well to replicate. And what happens when everyone knows behavioral economics, right? I think Tongzhe actually originally reached out to me, seeing that I have a paper on that topic, and invited me to actually talk about that project. But there is a reason why I chose to talk about self-replication instead. But what happens when everyone knows behavioral economics can only be done when you actually have some really established fun experimental findings in the literature. And then we are trying to, again, test whether or not, people are still going to respond to those well-documented treatments when they already know behavioral economics and are reminded of those treatment effects found in the literature. Okay, so all of those are really important research questions. But well, it's really difficult to launch a self-replication though, right? From my experience, first of all, graduate students are really hesitant to invest in replication studies. And of course, those are smart hesitations. Experiments with null results require much more work from senior researchers. And this is, again, in combination with how much graduate students are willing to invest in interpreting those results if they see them. Okay. And now there's also pre-registration as gotcha, right? I excuse my language, damn if I do, damn if I don't. In the past couple of years, I think there are different standards when it comes to pre-registration. So basically, it's really difficult to standardize that just yet. And then if you were going to self-replicate, like, do you have to pre-register? How are you going to pre-register? Are you allowed to deviate a little bit from your pre-registration is also another roadblocker. So let me just wrap this up, okay? From my perception, there are so many pros of involving original authors in a replication. So it's less of a gotcha, right? Because you can be really transparent and you are not really trying to do any damage to your opponents in this case. And you're really trying to be open-minded and transparent. And of course, you can also have knowledge in the original design and implementation and all the statistics and data when you involve the original authors in a replication. There are also cons in this, right? So there might be a stronger stigma against perceived novelty. People could potentially criticize by saying, you're the same research team replicating the same research idea. Why does it deserve to be published in a good journal? And then, if you then reach out to a really interesting paper that you love reading, and you reach out to their original author and trying to collaborate with them, we don't know whether or not, in some cases, it'll open a can of worms. So I would advise everybody to be careful there as well. So then, what next, right? From my point of view, just to wrap up, science is not built in one day. And if you think about medical field, if you think about all these other important fields, actually science was built by having replications. And replication can serve as medicine, not weapon, from my point of view. And of course, there are all sorts of challenges in reality, which I'd be more than happy to chat about. And last but not least, I think this is actually sort of a call for collaboration. If not on any specific project, I think it's important for us to recognize what are people trying to do in this field, as well as, if as a practitioner and policymaker, if there's a really interesting and important context-rich question needing answer, maybe one of the better ways is to really think about what has already been found in the literature that can be applicable. And we really have to keep our mind open and see whether or not, those interesting findings can actually apply into some specific contexts. And to that, I will conclude. And yep, thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Tongzhe. That was great. And so I have a question. Well, I have a few questions, and we have some audience questions. So, in general, about in terms of replications, and the gotcha point is really useful. There is that view, and but overall, it doesn't really have to be gotcha, because one thing is we have a lot of classic results in behavioral economics, but many of those are from lab studies, right? So, and ultimately, behavioral economics is a very applied, and economics in general, we are interested in policy. And behavioral economics, as you pointed out, is extremely context dependent anyway. So to me, it is actually very healthy to replicate, especially the classic lab studies in field, because say a lot of the work we still talk about were done in 1940s, and sorry, 40 years ago, not so
Yeah.
old, in the 80s, and the world has changed.
Yeah.
And it is so in some sense. So my question is, what do you think of like replicating classic lab studies to understand better like how they are applied these days, and especially like in terms of policy relevance uh, of that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think this is spot on, right? It doesn't have to be gotcha. That's of course me presenting this specific project would already signal you. I really strongly believe, replications are meaningful and useful. Um, so I think we as a field, from my point of view, we need more replication, not less. And of course, we should not replicate to play gotcha. I think we should really try to, learn from the literature and see, there are a lot of like really classical lab experiments that were run back in the days when Vernon Smith and Tversky and Kahneman actually started, investigating in this field. So basically, I see a lot of value to actually replicate those lab studies in the field, but also, like how to replicate and what to replicate would really depend on some key players in this field. So from my point of view, I can identify at least two very key players. One is who potentially will want to fund this study. So a lot of the times, if you like, the golden standard is we run a randomized controlled trial with real people when they're just going on in their life, and we implement, one treatment at a time, or some orthogonal treatment arms at a time, and see whether or not this is going to result in really, really important, economic impact in real life. But who is going to fund that, right? So another key player would be actually the people who are going to champion this idea. So I think it's quite possible that policymakers are going to be interested in their own policy questions, or their own design questions. They just don't know that there is this sort of low-hanging fruit by hiring some behavioral economists who know the literature and who can confidently find a way to replicate some of those. It actually would be a low-hanging fruit and a safer way, and lower cost way to actually examine a policy relevant question, compared to having to make everybody have the urgency to, I need to come up with something brand new and see whether or not, people tested that. I need to come up with a completely different idea. I think, when it comes to really important, especially field experiments and randomized control trials, from my point of view, I think it's safer and more cost effective to actually try to replicate something that's already well established in the literature. But then let me just wrap this up by saying it's also important how researchers are supporting each other, right? If I find it exciting to help policymakers do some program variation, so on and so forth. But there's no way that I can publish the paper as an academic, then like how long can I keep on doing this? I mean, this is not going to be sustainable, right? Let alone, I was like students are not going to be happy about their supervisors always asking them to like replicate things as well. So if there is no support from fellow researchers, so that's another key player.
Yeah. Completely agreed. I was actually like, this was going to be my follow-up question, that like, okay, great, funding would be good, but ultimately as researchers we care about publication, and maybe this is where like a center like ours, and like also your lab, like we can play a role by creating some value outside of publication uh, for researchers that way. So you already talked a bit about pre-registration and pre-analysis plans. Like, uh, so do you do like, you didn't do this for field experiments, but in general, and uh, like there are pros and cons, and so ignoring the kind of the like the outside, like say the uh, publish like editors would want us to do it and things like that, just even for yourself, do you find pre-registration helpful to think through? So personally, like I'm not a huge fan of pre-registration, because uh like one goal is to like catch bad actors, but I'm not sure pre-registration is useful for that. On the other hand, one benefit I see is actually thinking more thoroughly about the design, and especially feature analysis and so on. So do you usually do it only for field experiments, or do you also do for lab experiments, and how do you like kind of benefit from it?
Yeah, so I think this is such a quickly changing environment when it comes to pre-registration, right? 10 years ago, nobody was pre-registering.
Mhm,
And then 5 years ago, a lot of people are they started to like pre-register, and then that's almost like a checkbox, right? It's like, okay, I pre-registered my experiment, and that's good enough.
mhm,
And I think starting from like last year or so, I've got so many reviewers who actually took a look into the detail
mhm,
of pre-registration. So it's almost like, there's this experience as experimental economist, you don't always have the ability to publish your paper from like the same year of your data collection. So my experience is when I submit papers that were conducted like maybe not 10 years ago, but probably like 5 years ago when I didn't pre-register because it was a lab experiment. Sometimes reviewers are okay
mhm,
because I mean it's a lab experiment. So a quick answer to your question is I pre-register everything because I feel that I have to. Um, I see a lot of value in pre-registering field experiments with power analysis. I don't see as much value pre-registering your lab experiments. So, but at the same time, now it's really like sometimes, referees are okay when you didn't pre-register, but it was because it was, conducted a few years back. But now there's also like cases where my papers were criticized because I deviated a little bit from the pre-registration. So the details people now start looking at is, you pre-registered 5 hypotheses, you only tested 3. Where are the other 2? I mean, sometimes when you run a field experiment at a large scale, you have 2 different waves, and sometimes you're trying to like have 2 different papers, but then where is the fine, there is a fine line, but then where is that fine line and how do we overcome that? I don't know. I think the most important thing is, again, for us to not play gotcha, right? For us to really help one another. And to conclude on that, in my debate, I actually I was probably among the early people who put in pre-registration and advocated for it a little bit, only for field experiment, however. So, and when people were pushing really hard, my question back to them is typically this. Imagine if,
So yeah, we have one question from the
yeah,
audience. So since we're running out of time,
oh,
sorry
I
to
see.
cut you off, maybe I'll get to that.
Yep. Yep, let's do that.
So yeah, this question is quite specific. So regarding your first replication, so the design was identical. Was the sample respondent population also identical? Differences in respondent pool, for example, by engagement in your category, could have a big effect on willingness to pay, and presumably the size of any anchoring effect, which is moderated by the relevance of the product being evaluated.
Yeah, good question. So the short answer is they were comparable. So we did the replication in exactly the same location. And our screening standard was just a little bit different because in the original we included everybody over the age 18, and then we saw between 18 and 25 people didn't really have their residence. Therefore, they're not, they don't really have the relevance to our study. So in the replication, we increased our lower bound of age from 18 to 25, and that was about it. So we went to similar locations. Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
Thanks. So another question: it's hard not to like self-replication when initial results are lowish power. How would you think about the pros and cons of this approach versus raising our design power for our initial studies? So instead of replication.
Yeah, so well, I think this is more, I think, well, the most important thing is on the applied side, what's your feasibility, right? I mean, you can't really get the true effect size unless if you really sample the entire population, but there are a lot of constraints. So a lot of the times, can you do one thing at a time and then learn from those experience and then keep on building on that? Or do you want to just like have this one shot kind of, why don't we just like have it done in the first place? As well as, if you don't have any information to replicate, then how do you know the effect size and standard deviation? So basically, like when you do statistical power analysis, when you don't have those parameters,
Right,
you
exactly.
can only guess. So yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. One last question. So I would like to hear your hypothesis regarding the result that the estimated effect decreased by 3.4%. Any plan about follow-up research?
Sorry, which result?
3.4%. So I'm not actually
It
sure.
increased by 3.4%.
Yeah, the estimate effect decreased to 3.4%.
Yeah. So, so again, is that mainly due to statistical power? There has to be something else going on, right? So yes, you have a narrower span of your data, and you decrease your standard error by enlarging your sample size, so on and so forth. But at the same time, well, am I open to replicating that again? I'm always open. But in what context? Who is going to be interested in finding new evidence? And then those are essentially more important than my own interest in this.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of times these are also a cost benefit question, right? Like even for ourselves as a researcher, we have really a lot of questions, and then not all all of the questions we have after we write a paper, like it's a kind of the benefit probably most of the time outweigh or the cost most of the time outweighs the benefit. Yeah. Great. That was excellent. Thank you so much, Tongzhe, for starting us off. And this is exactly 1 o'clock. And so a full recording of this webinar will be available at our website by clicking the tab labeled webinars. And for the audience, you can exit this webinar by closing your Zoom screen. Thanks again, Tongzhe, and thank you all the audience for attending the first webinar of this academic year. Our next webinar will be by Mira Paleja of Ontario Securities Commission on November 11th. Thank you all, and see you around, Tongzhe.
Thank you.